this is Ellie. Thanks for joining me today. Well, if you've been with me for a while, then you probably already know that I'm a bit of a paradoxical kind of person when it comes to religion and faith. I'm not at all religious. I was not raised to be religious, and I hadn't even read the Bible or taken any interest in anything of a religious nature or specific in terms of faith rather than the wider kind of spiritual concept until really just a few years ago. But I have now read the whole Bible. I've also read the Quran, and I've studied the Gnostic texts, the Zohar, and a number of other spiritual writings. And I'm not an expert in any of these things, but I am working my way through anything and everything that I can find because I just want to get more understanding. And also, I can see connections between lots of these writings. I can see connections between all of them. Each seem to hold a piece of a wider puzzle. And I do. I also see connections between that and the ancient world as well, and the modern world. So I see connections everywhere. Gnostic cosmology in particular, though, has my attention, and the energy of concepts like shadow versus light and things like that, and the various other paradoxes that are raised by the Gnostics, well, they're just as relevant, I believe, as they ever were. And if you, perhaps if you read the Gnostic texts as though you're coming from a religious perspective, then you might have a different kind of viewpoint. It might just seem like a poetic and complicated and even at times nonsensical type of concept or series of theories. But when you read the Gnostic texts like I did, as someone who is reasonably well educated but was never really introduced to religion in my family environment or at school or anything, then the Gnostic texts just sort of, I'm looking at them as a completely fresh person who has no preconceived ideas. And it just comes alive with really simple messages that still hold true 2,000 plus years after these messages were created. Today, we're going to be rummaging through a little something that links the ancient Gnostic texts and to the tensions that are associated with the current world as well, between those who control and those who are being controlled, between the truth and the hiding of the truth and the search for that same truth that many of us are involved in, because I certainly am. I am one of those people who is searching for the truth. And I know that many people watching are also searching for the truth. And that's one of the reasons why this channel resonates with them. It's nice to be in good company. So thank you for joining me on this wacky ride that I'm on at the moment. So I've already produced a few episodes that provide the Gnostic backdrop for today's show. And this includes the story of Barbelo's spark of pure knowledge as the mother of all existence. I also did an episode on the goddess Sophia and the dilemma that she seemed to create for herself and how she resolved it. And anyone who's been with me in previous episodes has probably also walked the path of Mary and Mary's inner revelation from the Gnostic Gospel of Mary as well, which is my favorite. I have to say, I also like the Gospel of Thomas, but something about the Gospel of Mary, it just sort of, it's like a bell went off and everything changed from that point on. She was the one who sparked my interest in the Gnostic texts from the beginning. The very simple and concise messaging that came from studying her book just changed everything. And something that is very briefly stated, but crucial to today's show, is something that comes out of the book of Thomas, actually. And today's show is actually, even though it's about modern things, it's directly linked to a particular verse in the Gospel of Thomas, and that is verse 39. In today's show, I'm going to explain how the warnings that were given to Thomas more than 2,000 years ago, that he alleges came from Jesus, about a hidden key of knowledge that is being kept from us. Well, it actually perfectly encapsulates the very modern things that are happening around us right now. But, you know, I've also looked at the Apocryphon of John, and I've looked at how the Gnostic viewed the creation of the cosmos and everything and everyone in it. We've looked at the separation of humanity from their original purpose through the examination of the goddess Sophia. And we've also examined the paradoxes of life as a clue as to who we might be through a Gnostic poem, which is just a beautiful, very complicated poem called Thunder Perfect Mind. All of these episodes appear in their own playlist here on the channel, which is called The Gnostics. I'll make sure that there's a link to these videos in the description for today's show, just in case you wanted to take a look at any of those. Today, we're going to be looking at the ancient archetypes from all of these previous studied works and weave them into the context of the various theories surrounding groups like the Illuminati, the Bilderberg group, and all that grand rhetoric that's coming out about the fourth industrial revolution arising from the World Economic Forum and all the secret things that they seem to be doing as well, and also from a number of other groups and summits that are taking place around the modern world. And that only a few very select people are permitted to be a part of. And that's what makes it key. That's what links it to this verse 39 from the Gospel of Thomas, which I'm going to tell you in a moment. It's very clearly evident that the hidden dynamics of these global summits that are taking place in plain view all around us right now are very much linked to the warnings that were given by the Gnostics in their writings. So in Gnostic cosmology, the concept of an aeon exists, and an aeon is a divine emanation, and the first of these was Barbelo. The divine emanation, or the aeon, derives from the source creator, who is unknowable and unseeable. The source is referred to in some of the Gospels as simply the One, an entity that created itself and then, by thinking about it, also created Barbelo. And Barbelo is considered to be the mother of all creation. In the Gnostic text, she blossoms before any of the aeons are actually even conceived. She emits a kind of radiance that manifests as a ripple of consciousness that moves outward and affects everything that sits within its path. She acts as kind of like a blueprint for what the Gnostics considered to be the primal, pure and untainted spark of existence that sits within everything and everyone and that makes us all independent. And it transcends everything material that we experience in our lives, or which surrounds us. So the easiest way to understand how Barbelo fits into the world of secrets and hierarchy or hierarchical control that we see around us is to think of her as being something like a whisper of something that we've forgotten. So a bit like what we do here on this channel. I'm just finding so much of this hidden stuff out there that has always been there. We've always known it, but somehow we just didn't connect the dots. And Truth Lies in Twilight, the Prophecy, that book in particular, shows a lot of the connections between these things that aren't supposed to be connected. And according to the Gnostics, what I'm doing is I would be creating a whisper of forbidden research, which is very Barbelo-esque, because she is that whisper of the forbidden that that the Gnostics claim that traditional or hierarchical systems have actually tried to suppress. So I find reasons to question things as well that are part of the status quo. And I often am asking myself whether it's possible that lots of seemingly disconnected things could be connected. There are two different ways to kind of think of it. You've got the establishment and the dogma of science and religion that says this whisper of forbidden research that's uncovering secret truths that are being suppressed from us. The establishment often says that this is an example of modern day paranoia, finding reasons to suspect that there are secret societies, for example, out there that are hiding the truth from the rest of us. But then on the other side, there are those who are kind of locked out of these societies. And because we're locked out, we have to find another way to look inside to see what's going on. And when we look, those established explanations don't seem to connect the dots. They don't seem to make any sense. And that's the reason why we begin to question whether it really is all of what it seems to be or what we're being told it is. And so that's what Barbelo is. She's the consciousness that firstly is. So she is, and then secondly, she questions what is, and then finally, she transcends what is. And so she's a complex, but also very grounded element of a single thing, which is that consciousness that includes everything that exists. So we could be sitting here right now, and we are immersed in Barbelo and everything that she is. So that's the concept coming from her. So next, we're going to turn to verse 39 of the Gospel of Thomas, which is the text that I think you've heard me mention, but we haven't yet unpacked it in detail. In this verse, Jesus declares to Thomas the following statement, and I'm going to read it for you verbatim. It says, "The Pharisees and the scribes have taken the keys of knowledge and hidden them. They themselves have not entered, nor have they allowed those who wish to enter to do so. But you, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." There are two very important Greek words here that need to be fully translated in order to understand the message clearly. And those are the words Pharisee and scribe. First of all, the ancient Greek word phariseos translates to Pharisee. And it originates from an Aramaic term, which I'm not even going to try and pronounce, right? That means separatist or one who is set apart from others. What this means in the context of that time, 2,000 years ago, was that certain people, the Pharisees, were certain people who were considered to be spiritually, morally, ritualistically, hierarchically, and traditionally superior to everyone else. They were given exemptions, and they made the rules rather than having to adhere to the rules. There are also links to the Hebrew word paras, which also means to separate. So Pharisee is definitely a word in its linguistic origins that means to be separate from and to separate from others. So the Pharisees were separate from everyone else. They were the elite. They were the exception. And they were never going to blend with the great unwashed like you and me. And the second tier of people who supported their separation, well, those were the scribes. And in ancient Greek, the scribes derived from the word grammateas, which is also ancient Greek, which literally means to hoard the keys. So to hoard the keys, to jealously guard the keys of wisdom. So the role of the scribes was to write the narrative in such a way as to keep the key of knowledge solely in the possession of the Pharisees. That was their whole job. The scribes were the messengers and the gatekeepers for the messages that were permitted to be shared with the rest of us. They were the ones who filtered the truth. Today we would call them scholars. They are the disseminators of information. The biblical or religious scholars, for example, who translated the various ancient texts so that those texts could be understood by the rest of us. Those scholars actually who translated a lot of the ancient texts, including the Bible, for example, I've been able to show in numerous different ways on this show over the past, say, year and a half, that the translations are often inaccurate. When you go deeper and deeper and deeper into the analysis of the word and its origins linguistically, it was never intended on many occasions to mean what it finally ended up meaning in the Bible. And this perfectly aligns with the theory that the scholars are the scribes that are there to filter the information so that the Pharisees can keep the wisdom that they want to keep to themselves and share the wisdom that they want to share with others in the way that they want to spin it. So these scholars today are also the ones who interpret the present and disseminate it for us to have a general understanding of the here and now. People like historians and church elders, translators, their messengers, and then later the scientists of today, and the media, people who plan curriculum, legislators, and all of the other people who live and work to the highest elite and relay those messages about what reality is to the rest of us. Now, I'm not saying that, all of the media and people who create the curriculum plans and legislators and scientists, I'm not saying that they're all dishonest. What I'm saying is the elite are the Pharisees. They are the ones who are separated from us, even today. And somewhere between us and them are the scribes. And the scribes are the historians, the scientists, the media, the curriculum planners, the people who, conduct the peer review research in science and other type of discovery magazines, the legislators, the people who create the law, who adjudicate the law and things like that. All of these people are acting as a buffer between us and the elites. And whether they know it or not, they're in this turnstile of a system, kind of churning the same kind of status quo around and around and around, just like the scribes did. But a lot of it is set and dictated to by the Pharisees that are above them. The Pharisees were the controllers of the truth, and the scribes were their messengers. But the truth itself, by the time it got to us, had been filtered first by the Pharisees at one level and then refiltered by the scribes. It was no longer the divine truth by the time it got to us. And the rest of verse 39 in Thomas, well, there's more there as well. What the rest of that verse is telling us is to recognize that we are swimming in a sea of untruth that is designed and filtered by the elite and their messengers, and that we need to blend our sense of cunning with our unspoiled heart in order to find the real truth that is hidden behind all of those layers that we're being shown that aren't entirely true. Now, that verse was written more than 2,000 years ago, and it's still very, very true, very, very relevant. And that's one of the things I really love about the Gnostic texts. There's nothing really outdated. It kind of seems to stand the test of time. So I want to take a look at one of these secretive elitist groups a little bit more closely. And a wonderful place to start, because it is one of the most mysterious, I think, is perhaps something like the Illuminati. So let's begin with the Illuminati. These are the facts that we know. These are the things that are confirmed and well documented. The Bavarian Illuminati began in 1776. That was a very busy year, wasn't it? In 1776, as a small Enlightenment circle that was opposed to religious influence. It is confirmed as having a very brief history, and it's very well documented, this history. It was a secret society that was founded by a university professor of law in what is now called modern-day Germany. The original purpose for the Illuminati's creation was to promote reasoned thought, secular ethics, and civic virtue, in direct opposition to the religious absolutist ideas of faith and purity and redemption. The society was inspired by Freemasonry and classical philosophy, and it developed a tiered structure of initiation, symbolic rituals, and writings that were designed to gradually awaken members to its principles of rationale rather than blind faith. Initially, the people who were attracted to the Illuminati included intellectuals, students, and some members of nobility. The group expanded quite rapidly throughout southern Germany until it became embedded within various Masonic lodges. However, very quickly, it also got the attention of the church. And so it became a target because it was kind of anti-church, wasn't it? And so the church ended up doing its thing. And 9 years after its first creation, the Illuminati was officially outlawed. It was disappeared, I guess you could say. At least that's the official story. But unofficially, everything gets a little bit murky from that point on, and all of this confirmation and well-documented history kind of starts to get very fuzzy and vague. Centuries later, the Illuminati is still a symbol of hidden power and elite conspiracy. So the modern Illuminati, is still considered to be like a catch-all for elite power. And the term Illuminati is, I guess you could say, shorthand for anything that's unseen or any kind of invisible network that's pulling the strings behind the scenes. The Gnostics talk about a creed of beings called the Archons. And there's sort of similarities there. The Gnostics describe the Archons as a kind of a shape-shifting creature that uses dark forces to control reality and hide divine wisdom from us. The Archons are kind of like ancient boogeymen. Just like children learn about the boogeyman in ways that are really broad and abstract. I mean, he might be in your closet, he might be a monster, he might be a man, he's a shadowy kind of a figure, he could be under the bed at any time, at any moment kind of thing. Well, the Archons are a similar kind of abstract creature. They personify the idea that there are forces out there that prevent humanity from being truly free. If you're interested in knowing more about the Archons in detail, I talk about them in 2 previous episodes. They're actually episodes that appear in my archived Human Ascension with Ellie playlist. The first one is called The Prisoners of the Matrix episode, and also I do one on tech feudalism and how the right and the left are both being played. The Archons are described and discussed in quite a bit of detail in those 2 videos. I'll make sure that they are also in the description box for today's show for anyone who wants to see them. So when we map Barbelo's forbidden research and insights and the goddess Sophia suffering a kind of cosmic exile because of her Forrest Gump kind of mistake making, it creates a type of archetypal drama that is still playing out today in the modern world. I mean, we aren't really calling them secret societies anymore, but they are secret societies. The Vatican, for example, is a secret society. They have a treasure trove of information and other things that nobody is allowed to see, somewhere in their basement. They've changed the name of it to, it's no longer a secret archive or anything. Now they're using different language, but it is secret because, if you go and knock on the door, they're not going to let you in. It's a secret. And the annual World Economic Forum that meets in Davos is also a secret society. Sure, they produce summary documents about, what they planned and the talks that they had and everything, but none of us is permitted to go to those meetings. We only know what the scribes tell us. Can you see? You've got the Pharisees deciding what the information is. The scribes are disseminating the information that has been approved. And that's exactly the kind of thing that's happening with the Vatican and with the World Economic Forum. And the Illuminati is long dead and forgotten, right? At least that's what they say. But if that is the way it is, why is it that US currency still has an Illuminati symbol on every $1 note? So the symbol I'm talking about is the Eye of Providence. And it's linked to the Illuminati, and it's on US currency even today. It's actually part of the Great Seal of the United States, which was adopted in 1782. Just a few years before the Illuminati was officially outlawed. So the Illuminati was still present at the time, and they were outlawed just a few years after the Great Seal of the United States was adopted in 1782. It's kind of a strange coincidence, isn't it? Why would US currency and why would a seal be created for a secret society somewhere in the world that is considered to be against the church? And it was even agreed with devout Protestant lawmakers at the time. Very strange coincidence, and it doesn't quite sit right. But even stranger is that pyramid symbol that appears with what is considered to be that eye of divine approval on the $1 note. So the way that it's explained in congressional papers from that time is that the bricked squared off pyramid that appears on US currency and the eye symbol that sits above that pyramid are supposed to be a depiction of how a universal all faiths type of God is smiling down with approval over the United States, and how the United States is an imperfect nation striving to be better, which is why it isn't a finished pyramid. And I understand that this is the official record. It's written into the congressional papers, but it doesn't make any sense. And I when it doesn't make any sense, then of course, I start to scratch a bit deeper. The US Constitution was already written by then, and separation of church and state was already a legal concept in the 1600s. Actually, it was 1630s and 1640s in many states, at least 100 years prior to the formation of the US as a republic. So how does a God's approval align to a secular nation of laws that was just being created? And yes, the pyramid is unfinished, but that's because the top of it was stolen. It was originally complete, at least the one in Egypt was. Plus the pyramid of stone that appears on currency is directly linked to ancient sites in Egypt, not the United States or other countries. And the indigenous tribes of North America did create pyramid-like structures from soil, from the ground, but they weren't bricked. And this particular pyramid that appears on the $1 note is a bricked or stone created pyramid with the top missing, just like the Great Pyramid in Giza. What does that have to do with the United States at all? There's nothing like it in the US, and there never has been. Never. And so given the timing of the congressional papers relating to the symbols of US currency and references to Masonry in those papers, and the links between the Masons and the Illuminati, I'm a little bit suspicious of the official explanation. I think it's relevant to have questions about that and to kind of doubt the legitimacy of the official explanation, or at least to question it. There is no reason to place an Egyptian symbol and religious approval on a secular note from an entirely different nation that is in the first throes of its own sovereignty. Why would it do that? It doesn't make any sense. Instead, I think the symbols relate to a sense of divine sovereignty that directly links to the origins of humanity, because that's the simplest explanation. And like Judge Judy says, the simplest explanation is probably the truth. So I think that what we see there on the $1 bill is a hidden message of divine wisdom, masquerading as something else. And that makes me question whether the debunked Illuminati was ever really dissolved or disappeared. It might have just ended up morphing into groups like the Skull and Bones Rich Boys Club at Yale University, or the Bilderberg Group, or the Economic Forum, or the New Enlightenment Group arising from Silicon Valley elites. Hundreds of years later, thousands of years later, in fact, the Pharisees continued to congregate together. Small groups no bigger than 200 or 300 at a time, and they are designing the future with profit in mind. And maybe that's the reason why their symbol appears on money. They are the top 1% who hold the keys of knowledge, just like in the story of Barbelo. And they provide just information to their scribes so that the scribes can disseminate what they want us to know in history books and religious sermons and school curriculum and on talk shows and magazines and in books. And deep down, I think we kind of know this. Many people watching today, we know that this is happening around us. We can feel it in our bones. And what we also know is that it's getting much, much harder for the keys of knowledge to remain hidden, because so many of us are starting to awaken. And as we do awaken, we're shifting into a wider, deeper perspective. We're becoming enlightened from within, where the Pharisees and the scribes can't reach us, unless, of course, we let them. We've mapped out the ways in which the Gnostics showed us that the secret truths have been hidden, back then, but also now as well. It went from the Aeons and their divine spark of knowledge being trapped by the Archons who fed off ignorance, and it transitioned into a small group of elite families and corporations and religious structures and techno-oligarchs who now filter out any inconvenient knowledge with the use of modern-day scribes. These scribes are gatekeepers. They appear in media, in history books, peer-reviewed studies, and scripture. It's the way that the world has worked for thousands of years. And that's because somebody likes it that way. Somebody likes it that way, where the information and knowledge and wisdom of the world is hidden. Somebody likes it that way. But who is that somebody? Who likes it that way? No matter how humanity evolves, there always seems to be this Pharisee entity separated from the rest of us. Who are they? Because that's the biggest question of all. Solving that mystery is probably what opens the door to inexplicable wonders of knowledge and existence. And I kind of have a feeling that we are getting closer and closer to making that happen. I do. So let's visit that missing piece of verse 39 from Thomas again, and in particular the haunting section in the middle that I haven't covered yet, which says, "They have taken the keys, they themselves have not entered." This is a clue about the Pharisees that kind of exonerate them in a way, because the truth is that they don't know either. They are jealously guarding the divine truth from us, perhaps because they themselves are searching for it. And what that tells us is that wisdom doesn't come from being rich or powerful. It's a divine spark that comes from somewhere inside us. It's our awareness. Liberation begins when we see that the gates to spiritual enlightenment aren't physical, they're perceptual. And we have always had the power to control our own perceptions of reality. So when the World Economic Forum in Davos produces a report that speaks of restructuring civilization, we ask ourselves, is this really wisdom, or is it just another method of gatekeeping? And for the answer, we can hear the voice of Thunder Perfect Mind, that Gnostic poem about humanity's dilemma. Because in that poem, it says, "I am the saviour and the saved. I am the knowledge and the ignorance." This is a message. We, like Sophia, who I believe is the voice of Thunder Perfect Mind, must learn that when we fall, we consciously are falling, and it creates the perfect time for us to reassemble ourselves and build something new. We are the saviour and we are the saved. We're here to save ourselves. We are the knowledge and we are the ignorance, which means we have a conscious choice about which direction we go in. For this reason, I would never choose to live in fear of chaos, because even after chaos, particularly after chaos, it's our greatest opportunity for reinvention. Today's episode was not about uncovering ancient texts or anything like that. It was about writing something new, because we carry myths inside us right now. We've got stories of how we can reclaim our truth and free ourselves from messengers who are trying to reshape our perceptions. We carry designs inside us of how to craft new ceremonies that draw from the thunder inside us so that the perfection of our original self can be revealed. And we live in communities who have the power to speak freely and openly, even if that signal seems a little bit faint right now. You are the one who has direct connection to divine truth, and you are the scribe who can create the story of that for yourself to perceive. Everything else is a mirage. Just like the Gospel of Mary says, there is only one truth and everything else is a lie. And the one truth resides inside each of us. It is your light, the light that guides you towards your awakening and shifts you into the higher dimension. Welcome to the new world. This is Ellie Dreams Down Under. Thank you so much for watching. I love knowing you're here, and I'll see you in my dreams.